Welcome to the Dutch Fund for Climate Development event. My name is Melanie Tamarsians and I will be your moderator for today. We'll have speakers here live with me in the studio and also remotely joining us, as well as a lot of panelists that will guide us through this entire event. Why do we have this event? This is the DFCD event, and as climate change is actually one of the biggest challenges that we are facing these days, and it's already affecting millions of people and nature across the globe, we think it's very important and it urgently calls for a fund. And the fund is to actually have vulnerable communities to learn how to adapt to this, mitigate to these risks and the climate change, but also to drive sustainable change. We have a lot of viewers. We had over 300 people registering for the event of today. And this event is for Bangladesh, as many of you know, and the banner is showing. But we actually have a lot of viewers from all around the world and different continents. We have Thailand, we have Vietnam, the UK, Germany, and many, many more countries joining us. So welcome everyone. I think everyone is also in different time zones. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you. So you're here at the DFCD event. It was founded in 2019. It's a corporation in cooperation with four organizations: the FMO, Entrepreneurial Development Bank, SNV, WWF, and Climate Fund Managers. They have 160 million euros that they want to actually use as a catalyzer for an additional 500 million funds with private sector, and we'll be talking a lot more about the DFCD, but specifically today we are here because the DFCD wants to increase its activities in certain countries: Uganda, Kenya, and Bangladesh. Last week we held this event for Uganda, and today we're going to dive a bit deeper into Bangladesh. So this Sustainable Climate Solutions Challenge for Bangladesh is to inform you, to mobilize you, to let you know about whether you're eligible to apply for this fund, what the fund is, what the challenge is, but also to learn a little bit more about the local climate challenges, the local context, and from some examples from the country and projects that are currently running that we can learn a lot from. Feel free to ask your questions. It's an interactive session. In your platform, if I'm correct, you'll see a chat where you can be free to chat with us and put in your comments. But if you have specific questions that you would like us to ask live to the speakers, then please put it in the Q&A box so that we know we can prioritize it and make sure that your question can be asked. Of course, if you receive a lot of questions, some of them will be answered in the chat. Some of them I will be proposing to some of our speakers. And some of them will be answered later on in a frequently asked question list. And it will be uploaded online, so you can look it up afterwards. So please interact with us. Feel free to share anything you like and ask your questions to us. And let me, without further ado, actually introduce you who we will be having with us to talk with us. So we have an hour and a half event, and in the first hour I have 5 speakers that are going to give some presentation and more insights into the local context, into the fund and the challenge. After which we can ask them a few questions, but we also have 5 other panelists that I will be introducing to you later on that will also answer some of the questions that we have prepared for them or that you will be asking them. And if we still have some time, we will have more time for Q&A and more questions, so keep them coming. But first of all, the 5 speakers we have one with us live in the studio, Aart Mulder. Welcome. You're the Portfolio Manager Climate Fund Manager at DFCD. And we'll be talking in a little while. But we also have 4 other speakers that will be joining us remotely. Professor Salimun Hok, the Director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, and he is the professor at the Independent University of Bangladesh. Then we will have Salima Ahmad, the Member of Parliament of the People's Republic of Bangladesh, but also President and founder of the Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Bangladesh. Then we will have Mohammed Saifullah, and he'll actually take us through the project that they run in Bangladesh to give us examples, as he is the head of business, ACI AgroLink. And last but not least, Alex Dawns, talk a bit more about the specific challenge, actually, as he is the business and investment officer of DFCD. First of all, starting with Aart Mulder and talking about the challenge, let's first start with, can you actually explain what the challenge is?
Yeah, thank you very much, Melody. Well, the challenge is actually about the following. We try to invite everyone who has a possible solution for climate issues in Bangladesh to join us in this challenge. And if we talk about climate in Bangladesh, we try to distinguish between 2 key elements. One of them being climate mitigation, which actually means how can you avoid the temperature to further rise? How can you actually calm down the increase of the temperature, which is often has to do with CO2 emissions. And the second thing is climate adaptation. Adaptation is actually a kind of plan B story. You accept already that the climate will change in a certain way, floods, droughts. What can you do about these excessive elements in climate to protect the environment, but also to enable the people to be more adaptive, more resilient against all kinds of climate change effects? Now, these two issues we try to combine in this challenge, and it would be fantastic if we get a lot of applications to address these kind of climate issues. And during the session, what you already told Melody, the criteria will also be explained by Alex Downs, but also the Bangladesh context, as well as a fantastic panel of experts who will shed some light on the Bangladesh context, and that with an audience around the world, it's really impressive to see. But maybe before we go on further on the details on the challenge and of course on the context, it would be nice to show a video on the Dutch Fund for Climate Development, the so-called DFCD, who's organizing this challenge, and that actually explains a little bit what DFCD does.
The landscape in Bangladesh is a riverine floodplain of 3 major rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. The coastal zone of Bangladesh is home to significant aquatic as well as terrestrial ecosystems, which the population has found ways of living and using in harmony with nature rather than destroying it. During the monsoon period, these rivers flood and cover the floodplains with water. That is when fishing is the main activity. In the dry season, the land can be used for agriculture, mainly rice production. However, this traditional pattern has been disrupted by climate change and infrastructure developments, which impedes the natural flow of water and causes flooding after heavy rainfall, followed by drought. A nature-based approach is needed to improve food security, fresh water and sanitation. The DFCD and the Global Center on Adaptation will welcome any scalable climate solution that contributes to a solution.
So what is actually shown in the video, the DFCD story, but the key issue that DFCD, the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, tries to address is the so-called project finance life cycle. And it's shown on the screen now what actually happens, what the dilemma is in many projects in the world on climate, is that there are very good ambitions. There are really a lot of entrepreneurs who try to address climate issues. There are also a lot of NGOs involved in these countries to get things done. But for whatever reason, a lot of these projects get stuck. And there are 2 reasons for that. One of them actually is that all these good projects lack a long-term finance solution, because a lot of financial institutions are too much on a distance to understand what's happening on the ground with these projects. And secondly, also there's not sufficient element enough of grant funding to boost these projects towards really a scalable, a financeable, a viable business case. Now, via a combination of this consortium with NGOs, but also with a development bank like FMO, we combine all the knowledge all together and start already from the early stage, entrepreneurial stage, from a project together with the right funding, together with the right expertise on the ground, because our consortium partners, WF and SNV, do have local presence. And they work together with us already to think about a financeable, scalable solution with a long-term debt or equity or any kind of other financial product to be provided later on, and to boost it towards scalability. Now, that's actually the key dilemma we try to address with the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And hopefully, by all the people who are joining us in this whole journey, we will get a lot of extra applications to show that it actually works.
Yeah, and so you talked a bit more about the DFCD, the initiator of this challenge, but this was founded 2 years ago. So why the challenge now?
Yeah, if we look at where we stand now, indeed, almost 2 years we are now working with the fund. We implemented the fund 2 years ago, what you mentioned, 2019 it started. And we have, on a global scale, quite a number of projects. We have now already 18 projects running in different stages, but most of them already in a really advanced stage. So actually, it proves the concept is working. But at the same time, It's also mentioned last time on the Earth Day, on the Leaders Summit attached to the Earth Day, the temperature has already increased. It's 1.3 degree after the Industrial Revolution. So there's extremely huge money flows needed to address the key climate challenge. So it's simply not enough. We have 18 projects, but we have ambitions to grow the funds and to do much, much more. And that's the reason why we thought, okay, let's push it forward to do even more than what we have done now.
Mm-hmm. But then why Bangladesh? So from all these continents that you have a lot of projects running, but why the challenge specifically focusing on Bangladesh?
Yeah, we thought specifically about Bangladesh because Bangladesh has a couple of key landscapes that's really fantastic, that really have a lot of original species, but at the same time are under pressure because of climate change now. You have this really amazing Bengal Delta area, but you also have species like the Bengal tiger, the Asian elephant as the most well known. But you need to do something actually to keep these unique landscapes in place. And the Bangladesh government is extremely supportive. It's actually in the world already maybe one of the most striking examples of how they address climate adaptation. So the enabling environment with the government is there, and that's the reason why we thought with the proper so-called nature-based solutions, where we try to find a solution that's based on nature, protecting the natural landscapes, but at the same time serving the livelihoods of people, is really possible in the Bangladesh context, and that's why we chose for Bangladesh as one of the 3 countries. Well, and maybe to give some further depth on this Bangladesh story, I would like to show a video on Bangladesh, which is actually maybe showing the most striking, the most renowned landscape in Bangladesh currently.
Yeah, let's move to the video then and see more in depth on Bangladesh.
The landscape in Bangladesh is a riverine floodplain of 3 major rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, and the Meghna. The coastal zone of Bangladesh is home to significant aquatic as well as terrestrial ecosystems, which the population has found ways of living and using in harmony with nature rather than destroying it. During the monsoon period, these rivers flood and cover the floodplains with water. That is when fishing is the main activity. In the dry season, the land can be used for agriculture, mainly rice production. However, this traditional pattern has been disrupted by climate change and infrastructure developments, which impedes the natural flow of water and causes flooding after heavy rainfall followed by drought. A nature-based approach is needed to improve food security, fresh water and sanitation. The DFCD and the Global Center on Adaptation will welcome any scalable climate solution that contributes to a solution.
So maybe you've also noticed that we watched the same video twice now, but at least the repetition, I think now we all really know why we need this challenge for Bangladesh. We made a little technical mistake, so we'll be showing you the next video that is actually explaining what the DFCD is about. So let's also watch that one so you can see what the DFCD is about, and then we'll move to the next speaker.
Climate change is one of the biggest challenges we face today. It is already affecting people and nature across the globe, with developing countries being most impacted. There is an urgent need for investment to enable vulnerable communities and ecosystems to adapt to climate change. Yet funding is in short supply. The government of the Netherlands has committed to addressing this need by making €160 million available through the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, known as the DFCD. Managed by a pioneering consortium of FMO, Climate Fund Managers, SNV and WWF, the DFCD will work with the private sector to catalyse over €500 million in additional funding for bankable projects across the world. These projects will boost the health of fresh water, forest, agricultural and ocean ecosystems, and improve water management. Critically, the DFCD will help vulnerable communities to adapt, drive sustainable development, and strengthen global efforts to tackle climate change. The fund is ready to build new partnerships. So join us in our mission to create a more resilient future.
Great, so now we're all up to speed with all the videos. Aart Mulder, maybe another question. So we talked about that you have a lot of projects, 18 actually, running across the globe, but these challenges are specifically for Kenya, Uganda and Bangladesh. We talked about why Bangladesh, but why actually these three countries?
Well, these three countries, all the three of them have a combination of factors why we chose the three of them. But at the same time, we have a global mandate. We can do all the countries that are either low-income countries or middle-income countries, according to the World Bank list. But coming back on these three countries, we made a selection based on three criteria. First of all, it needs to be really climate relevant. The country itself needs to have climate impact and needs to try to find solutions there. So the second issue is linked to this. There needs to be a kind of so-called enabling environment that the government, but also that the entrepreneurs in the country themselves might be ready to follow us in such a journey. And the third thing I would like to mention is the so-called landscape approach. We really try to find in all the countries critical landscapes, and our consortium partner WWF is very good in that. Critical landscapes that need to be preserved, and within these landscapes we try to find so-called bankable solutions. So landscapes, climate, and also the enabling environment with the government and the companies working in these countries. If you look at the map that's shown on the screen now, we have indeed 18 projects, and it comes from actually, in particular in Southeast Africa. We have, for instance, a peatland restoration project in Indonesia, but also we have in Africa, in Kenya and Uganda, a project with smallholders. We have sustainable forestry in West Africa, in Sierra Leone. We have in Bolivia a project with a microfinance institution dedicated to rural farming. So we have quite a global presence already, but we really want to make a difference in a couple of selected countries. And now I already mentioned the criteria why we chose for these three.
Yeah, so it makes a lot of sense for these three and then specifically Bangladesh, which can also help us move on to the next speaker that can help us dive a bit deeper into what the local context and the climate challenges in Bangladesh are. We'll be having Professor Salimul Haq, the Director of International Center for Climate and Development, and he'll be taking us about the foremost climate challenges we have and how the DFCD can actually address these challenges. Welcome. We have you here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor Salimul Haq. The floor is yours. Talk us through the climate, the local context of the climate challenges.
Thank you very much, Melody, and thank you to DFCD for organizing this very important event. So let me pick up the question that you had on why Bangladesh. If you look at any global ranking of nearly 200 of the world's countries in terms of vulnerability to climate change, depending on what different aspects of the climate change impacts one looks at, Bangladesh almost always comes up number 1, number 2, or number 3 on any global list. And the reason why that is a combination of different factors, one of them being the size of the population, the other one being the geography and location, and the third one being the relative poverty of the people. Now, what do I mean by that? The population of Bangladesh is about 170 million people, and we live within a geographic area of less than 150,000 square kilometers, which makes us much over 1,000 people per square kilometer, which is usually the density of a city-state like Hong Kong or Singapore, not of a country of this size. And secondly, we are located on the delta of two of the world's biggest rivers, the Ganges and the Brahmaputra, which regularly flood, and the flooding has become more severe in recent times and will become more severe in future. We also are hit by cyclones that come through the Bay of Bengal and are also becoming more severe. And we also, part of the country is also drought prone at certain times of the year. And we are also suffering from the impacts of sea level rise in the low-lying coastal delta area at the same time. So Bangladesh, from a variety of climatic factors, it becomes one of the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And because we are still a poor country, we're a least developed country, although we are trying to develop and graduate out of least developed country status, we are still nevertheless quite a poor country, which means that the numbers of people that are impacted by climate change are very, very large. And therefore, the issue is something that Bangladesh has to take very seriously and is taking very seriously. So what I've described in terms of the problem is really something that we realized well over a decade ago. And since the last 10 years, the country, the government, from the prime minister down to all our ministers and different government ministries, as well as the NGO sector and the academic sector that I represent, and the private sector increasingly are now getting involved in finding solutions to the impacts of climate change. And so I will move from the problem part to the solution part. And the solutions are, as we have just heard from Art, both on mitigation, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as well as adaptation. On the mitigation side, there's been quite a lot of development in Bangladesh. We have a very thriving solar home system, solar companies, private sector companies. More than 5 million homes have been solarized with solar home systems, and there are expanding avenues of looking at solar in the country. We are also potentially very good on wind, and something that is worth exploring, particularly with the Dutch wind expertise knowledge, looking at offshore wind in Bay of Bengal, which we have not explored. We know there's a lot of wind, but we don't know how to exploit it, something to look for in the future. But more importantly, on the issue of adaptation to the impacts of climate change, and particularly in the very low-lying coastal areas where we are seeing a very significant increase in salinity, both in drinking water. So if you were to visit the coastal area of Bangladesh and drink the water that the people drink there, you will taste it. I can taste the salt in the water. The human body can absorb a certain amount of salinity, but some people can't, particularly pregnant women. Get affected by salinity in the water, and they get high blood pressure, which can lead to preeclampsia at childbirth. And this has been well documented happening in the coastal area of Bangladesh. And one of the adaptations is to provide rainwater harvesting to have drinking water from rainwater. And if you go around the coast of Bangladesh, you'll see every house has a rooftop tank to harvest rainwater that they can use for drinking purposes only in the lean period. The rest of the time they use normal water. At the same time, there's been quite a lot of development in the agriculture sector, particularly in terms of new varieties of rice, saline-tolerant varieties of rice. Millions of farmers are growing it in millions of hectares, and other opportunities in the crop sector to have more saline-tolerant varieties of crops, flood-tolerant, drought-tolerant, and you will hear later from one of our leading private sector companies, ACI, who are very much occupying that space. The opportunities there are tremendous, but they are not as easy as the opportunities on the mitigation side, where if you sell renewable energy, you can actually get an income. By reducing risk, it doesn't generate income. It protects the income, but it doesn't generate new income. And therefore, making it into a profitable enterprise is a bit more tricky, not impossible, but a bit more tricky. And I welcome the DFCD opportunity to bring in and reduce the costs of private sector investors, the bankers and the investors and entrepreneurs to go up a learning curve and learn how to make a profitable outcome enterprise out of adapting to the impacts of climate change. And the last point I'll make is, again, to emphasize one very important area that Art mentioned, which is on nature-based solutions. Bangladesh is home to the world's biggest mangrove forest. It's called the Sundarbans, and it's in the southwestern part of our country. Around the Sundarban, there are huge opportunities for nature-based solutions, eco-friendly investments that are both adaptation to climate change, they can be also mitigation to climate change, and they can preserve and preserve the ecosystem. Similarly, we have very major wetlands in other of the country, particularly the Howar Basin in Sylhet, in the northeastern part of our country, where again, there are opportunities for nature-based solution, both mitigation and adaptation. There's quite often projects that can do both adaptation and mitigation, which is a sweet spot that we can look at. Planting trees, for example, is a good example. So I welcome this opportunity for the fund to stimulate thinking, stimulate investments, and to get the private sector much more involved in looking for solutions that are then viable and sustainable going forward. I'll stop there for now. If there are any questions later, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Salim Haq. Yeah, that was very insightful also to hear more about, happy you gave a lot of the problems that we see, but also a lot of solutions. So you talked about the different reasons why Bangladesh is really a good country for this, and there is urgently need for funding. I'm also curious to hear what the financial situation in terms of climate funding is in Bangladesh. So besides the DFCD, are there other financial fundings happening?
Absolutely. So the biggest source of finance in the country is the government of Bangladesh itself. 10 years ago, the government set up a climate change trust fund in which our finance minister has been putting $100 million or euros equivalent in Bangladesh taka every year to provide funding for many, many different kinds of projects. Over these last 10 years, many hundreds of projects, mostly adaptation projects, have been funded. In the last couple of years, the Minister of Finance has actually included a climate budget in the national budget. So nearly 8% of the national budget is now allocated across 25 different ministries for each of the ministries to take climate change activities into account. So in a very real sense, Bangladesh is probably one of the first countries to be mainstreaming climate change activities in the country and financing it through our own resources. 8% of a national budget is no joke. It's a very significant amount. At the same time, there are international players, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, bilaterals like the Dutch government and the UK government and others are also funding different kinds of activities to tackle climate change. The amount of funding that is needed and the amount of funding that is available don't really match. The availability is much smaller than the need, but there is a significant growing interest and knowledge in investing in climate change. And particularly, I feel the DFCD's niche is to bring the private sector on board, because that has been one of the areas that we have not been that successful in. Government is doing a lot, private sector a bit, but can do a lot more.
Yeah. Thank you, and I think it shows also the uniqueness of this fund, but it's also good to see that there's national ownership, which actually is also the perfect bridge to move on to our next speaker. Thank you, Professor Salim Haq, and you'll be still with us after, so if there's any more questions coming in, I'll be asking them to you later on. But it's also a good bridge to move to Salima Ahmad. You're the Member of Parliament and President and founder of the Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Bangladesh. So we know now that there is a lot of problems. There are some solutions. There is an urgent need for funding, even more than there is available at this moment. But what concrete actions do you see now that we really need to take? And it's interesting to also hear from the voice of the Parliament as well.
Thank you very much. This subject is very close to my heart, but I'm not an expert, but I'm a concerned citizen. And the alarming part is that, you know, as a parliamentarian, when I look at my constituency, I don't see a single person thinking of waste management, thinking of using of water properly, thinking of sanitization in a proper way, thinking of sanitization, thinking of food security. So this is very alarming, because when we cannot, disseminate information and raise awareness to the citizen how much government does, it becomes very impossible or a bit difficult. You know, I have just thought of 3 areas where DFCD is already working. One is that the food security area, where we know that Bangladesh is able to meet up the food, demand at the moment, but our sea level will increase, and there are many lowlands where people are already residing, and I think that awareness and planning should should be started to shift these people from the low level, from the lowland, and also how small land can have more cultivation. So because already Bangladesh has been very successful for that, and how we can use less water for irrigation, because huge amount of water has been used for rice or cultivation. So how we can reduce it, that planning is important. For the fresh water, already Mr. Salimul Haq has mentioned about desalinization, which is very true. And our Prime Minister, or Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she's already speaking and asking everyone for rain water harvesting. But how much we are doing. Every year in the monsoon area, there's so many rains, especially for the last 2-3 years. But if I speak about my constituency, nothing has been done. So, and also like we have to plan that not digging out water from the land, but bring it from the rain. And third is the sanitization, where Bangladesh is or has been successful is to some extent on the sanitization. Almost every individual house has sanitization. So now I think we need to start seeing that if you can produce biogas from these toilets and from then that can be useful also. So one of the things is very much important, because we have now local government which is run by upajelas. We have upajela chairman, we have union porishad chairman. How much awareness they have about these issues. So local community leaders involvement is very important. Local political leaders involvement is important, so that all of them can talk about this issue, and then from the grassroots things need to be started, because I think the pyramid is more from top to bottom, but I think we need to start from bottom to high to solve our issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to hear, and you gave a bit more examples actually on the challenges that you also think there should be a lot of focus on. I'm also curious to hear if you have something to add on some climate challenges that Professor Salimul mentioned, or that you think are there certain areas that you feel DFCD is now maybe overlooking, or some points of attention that you think there should really be specific attention to for Bangladesh?
I as I was speaking, that that you have to find out, or the mapping out of Bangladesh. And in each district, mostly I think most of the, to some other than two, three cities, all cities are connected with the river. But that river management, how people are doing it, even in your video, we have seen that, there is a toilet and just beside people are drinking from that river. So that awareness, whenever someone is building something, is she or he thinking that what is happening to someone else, that I'm building a toilet on the river. So these are the things people need to understand. So in the school, we need to talk about it. It's very important that the child should know about it. Salimul Haq knows everything, but a child doesn't know, right? But he or she is also a citizen. He or she can play an important role. So we have brains, but we don't have actors. That is the challenges I think Bangladesh has. And as I said, I'm very close. This is very close to my heart, because I feel this is so important for the survival of the human being, and also so many people has died because of these issues. So as a human being, as a mother, I think it's very, very important, and we are very blessed that our government understand it. But why we as a citizen of Bangladesh, we don't understand it? happening. So where is the lag behind? So that connection need to be done. That if the citizens are not aware, if the political people take advantage of something destroying the land, destroying the air, who is going to be punished? Someone need to be punished. That person need to be punished. That doesn't happen. So these issues need to be solved. Otherwise, we'll just talk like this. We know that certain things need to be mitigated, something need to be adapted. But how it will do without the citizens' participation? And how much? If you come to my constituency, I can challenge you. If you talk about the climate change, 99.9% will say we don't know about it. And my constituency is situated in Titas River. And I'm seeing every day whenever I'm going there, and my heart cries.
Yeah.
So
you started with saying that the topic is very close to your heart, but I think we can all also very hear the passion in it. And I think it's very nice that you also mentioned not even only the thematic points of attention that we need, but actually the way of encountering this, that you really need to also talk about awareness and education and making sure that it's participatory and you engage all the grassroots communities as well. And actually, Art Mulder here with me at the table also would have like to ask you a question.
Yes, Mr. Lima Ahmed, fantastic to hear your passionate story, and also was particularly interested and triggered by the fact that you are looking for bottom-up solutions, which is, of course, I think also what we try to achieve. Also, I was really happy to hear that you do have the brain power, but at the same time, you're looking for actors. And in that perspective, could you shed a little bit light what kind of actors you were looking for to find maybe a more easy bridge between the challenge in Bangladesh and what we try to envisage with DFCD?
We have Bangladesh is land of youth. So 70% people are below 40 years. So we need to, as I was saying, involve and engage the school students, college students, university students, and make them awareness. In my constituency, because I'm bringing back all the time my constituency, because that's a sample I can bring in. There's no waste management issues. Everyone is throwing everything on the street, everywhere, and no awareness. So as I was saying, the Union Parishad chairman, the students, and the Upajila Nirbahi officer, we have UNO. So that these people need to be taken care.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I like to later on also dive a bit deeper with the other speakers as well. So I'll be moving now to the next speaker, but it's nice to talk a little bit more about how we can make sure that also the awareness and education part and what role it plays. Thank you, Salima Ahmed. You'll be still with us, so if there's any questions, please keep them coming to us again. But moving on to Mohammed Saifullah, the head of business ACI Agro. And it's actually nice to hear from you about the project that you're also running and to learn a little bit more about how it is to have a project in Bangladesh that is funded by DFCD. So take us with you on the story and the journey of your company and project.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to take my audience to a presentation to share our project. So this is basically the climate resilient sustainable shrimp value chain. It's in the coastal region of Bangladesh, as you can see in the picture, and it's run by ACI Agro Limited, and I'm heading this project. You see, there are severe climate challenges for our farmers. There are frequent cyclones and tidal waves that actually sometimes wipes out the entire shrimp farms, and there's a huge damage in the economy in the southern region. There is extreme temperature variability that puts stress on the ecosystem, oxygen level, pH level, physiological and digestion system of the shrimp that impacts the growth of the shrimp. There are also, due to climate change, there are also heavy rainfall, and the pattern is very erratic, and that causes the changes in the salinity level. And at many times, the baby shrimp, they die before the maturation. And there are also lack of weather forecast data to the farmers, which results in the poor management of climate risk. There is a lack of education to our farmers so that they can the climate resilient farm management is very absent. There is as a result, all this together basically that declines the national production of shrimp, and this puts a long-term sustainability impact to the industry. And as a result, we can see that our export has also declined, and many of the reasons that actually we don't have enough raw materials in our hand. That's why basically we have come up with this project. This is climate resilient sustainable shrimp value chain in Bangladesh. Basically, this is in the operation of climate adaptive farming, inbound logistics, processing and export of shrimp to global market. The kind of interventions we are doing for our farmers that will give them access to climate technology, will give them access to finance, and at the same time will also give them access to quality seed. We'll also introduce a couple of innovative technology that actually for the farmers to tackle the climate change, and that includes incubator chamber, mangrove farming, and many other things. So these are the interventions that actually together the kind of impact that will make in our business is, there will be increased farmer production. There will be, and because of this farmer production increase, we'll have in our factory, we'll have more supply of raw materials, and that will actually increase the capacity of utilization of our factory. As a result, we can increase our export, and that will increase the profitability. That's the motivation we have to take this project forward, so that if you can really work in this kind of climate project, that's basically ultimately impacting the profitability of the business. And we are very happy to share that DFCD has awarded a grant for our project to pilot this in the coastal region of Bangladesh, and we are very glad to that. And actually, we are initiating the project very soon. So there are socio-economic impact of this project for this intervention. There will be a climate and disaster resilient shrimp value chain through tackling this climate change. There is a creation of employment, as we'll be working in the 18,000 hectares of land. So there will be huge opportunity for this kind of employment in this area. There will be improved economy and livelihood for farmers, because 7,500 farm families will be involved in this project, and the farmers will be also able to promote. This project will also able to promote the women empowerment in this area, because majority of the shrimp farmers, they are women, and they manage this shrimp farm. And one of the very important thing that actually also Dr. Salimul Haq also mentioned about the Sundarban, because this project is also to protect the Sundarban, because of for lack of job opportunity in that area, many people, they go to Sundarban for illegal fishing and deforestation. So if you can generate income generating activities in this area, we can also protect the Sundarban from this kind of intervention. And finally, because we are having this partnership with DFCD, and also this is from the Dutch support, and some of the DFCD partners, they are also living in Vietnam. So there are ample opportunity to transfer this global technology, climate adaptive technology, from one country to another country. And as a commercial vehicle, we can actually take this to the farmers. So that's also very important element that we think for us. And that's basically the project that we talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed Saifullah. Yeah, it's great to hear a bit more about the company and also the project that you're running. I'm also curious to hear, as we have a lot of viewers with us from all over the world, but also specifically tuning in for Bangladesh and maybe also considering to apply. Can you also share a bit more about how the process was, or what you would like to share with people considering to apply as well?
Sorry, I cannot hear the question. Can you please repeat?
Yeah, of course. So for the viewers that are watching and maybe are considering to also apply for the fund, or specifically for this challenge for Bangladesh, what would you like to share with them about how the process was, or specifically on Bangladesh? What would you like to give as a takeaway to them?
Right. I believe that actually the viewers that actually seeing this from Bangladesh, they need to understand what kind of climate impact is making in their business value chain, the operation value chain. There are severe impact. That's why the one that we have presented, that in our supply chain, there is an impact. But there are many areas where product is being impacted, our customers are being impacted. So we need to identify, the business need to identify, individual need to identify that what kind of impact is being made for this climate change. And based on that, they can create the project, they can develop the project, and they can put it forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Mohammed Saifullah. And again, if there's any Oh, I actually see there is a question from the audience, so I can immediately ask it to you. What's the role of the stakeholders in your project? Because we know that the stakeholder involvement is very important to the DFCD. So the question is, what's the role of stakeholders in your project? And what do you think was important to the DFCD in this regard?
Yeah, one of the major stakeholders, the suppliers, the farmers, and they have a huge role in our project that actually we are working with these farmers, and they will be the core supplier of the shrimp raw materials in our factory. So they are the main part of the main element of our project, and apart from that, the community, the other community where the farmers are living, the shrimp community, particularly there are a lot of ice suppliers. There are a lot of transportation suppliers. So these are the community or the stakeholders. They are also, will be benefited from this project, and ultimately our customers will get the freshest quality of product that actually coming from the farmers directly to our factory. So these stakeholders will be benefited from our project.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next speaker now. Thank you, Mohammed Saifullah. But we'll be having some more questions for you. And I know that Art Mulder is also eager to ask you another question later on. But first, actually moving on to Alex Dons to hear a bit more about the challenge. So what the challenge is, why it's in Bangladesh. And actually, what I also wanted to mention is that there's over 300 registrations that we have now. And over 60% is actually from Bangladesh, which is also really nice to hear. But we're here now. Alex Dons, tell us a bit more about the challenge. The floor is yours.
Hi, Melody. Hi, Art. In my section, I would like to give a little bit of guidance to the audience and also to companies and potential partners who are thinking of working with the DFCD. In my section, I would like to cover 4 areas. The 4 points that we would look for to consider as an ideal proposal. Also 10 points that we look for in proposals. I'll walk through that so that's helpful for people to know. And I think lastly, talking through the actual application process, how is it that the DFCD actually works so sponsors know how to engage with us. And then I think lastly, talking through the timeline. The DFCD is quite active and I think it'd be helpful to know, for people to know how to engage with us. So with that, I would like to present my slide here. Okay, can you see this okay?
You can see your slides now perfectly.
Okay, great, thank you. So for the first step, what makes for an ideal project? So there's 4 key things that we look through. And as Art mentioned early on, we look for landscape-related projects. So one of the keys for climate change adaptation is to think about innovation. And one of the ways that the DFCD is looking at innovation is really pulling together landscapes. So landscape is a way that an investment can have a bigger impact across multiple parts in a value chain. So we have 4 areas that we look for. One of them is strengthening resilience. So we would look for projects that can strengthen resiliency in Bangladesh, as well as for the project's larger landscape. So that's one of the key aspects. We look for establishing impact synergies with other initiatives in the region. And a good way to think about this is if you can unlock one part of the value chain, but that also unlocks other pieces, this can lead to a very good catalytic impact effect. So we're very conscious of this. We also look at working in concert with Bangladesh's intended nationally determined contributions for climate change. This is very important to us. And the last one is benefiting vulnerable groups and women either directly or indirectly. The criteria that we look for, we can talk through this. There's 10 key areas. One of them is commercial viability. We look for projects that can stand on their own and be commercially viable. In this way, the companies have the ability to get support from the DFCD, but also can become strong companies in and of their own right. We also look for something called a Rio Marker 2, and there is a technical book by the OECD on Rio markers, and we look for projects that fit Rio Marker 2s either in adaptation or in mitigation. We also look for projects that are located in eligible countries. And of course, for this challenge, Bangladesh is one of those countries, so that would be perfect. And we also look for national ownership. So we want to invest into projects that also fit the direction that Bangladesh would like to go and supports Bangladesh's priorities. We also look at projects that support vulnerable groups. So this can be the poor, the disabled, children, and of course, creating jobs and opportunities and avenues for women as well. There we go. And there's an area where we, from the DFCD point of view, there's some areas we're not able to invest in. And I think these would be common sense. Things like deforestation or increasing greenhouse gas emissions. These are things that are not in line with climate change. So we would look for projects that fit climate change related projects, and we have a full list that we can provide to people that are interested. The size of the organization is also important. So we would look for a company that has some presence, typically a company that has assets of at least 6 million euros, or alternatively has turnover of 6 million euros. We also look for partners that need long-term finance. So you have a project that can be scaled up. Typically, we like projects that can lead to investments greater than 6 million euros. The other aspect I think that's important for sponsors to know about as well, for this challenge, we offer for kind of the winning partner 350,000 euros of matching grant, but we would also expect the partner to be a co-investor into this program, and we would ask that they contribute at least 25% of that 350,000 euros. And some of that could be, of course, payment in kind, but there would be some requests for cash contribution as well. So just be mindful of this. And the last point is that we look for projects where the DFCD can have an impact. And this is called additionality. But we look for projects where the DFCD is instrumental in unlocking the investment, which otherwise may not happen. Next, I'd like to move to the application process so the audience can see how is it that the DFCD is going to go through this process. The first step for the audience or the sponsors is to check the criteria and then complete an intake form. And then please submit that to us. The DFCD would then review the project and we would identify promising projects. We would also provide feedback to sponsors. And we can provide, go or no-go decisions. This where people know where they stand. After that, for the ones that were successful, we would provide a full application, and we would work with the sponsor to help complete the application and then get it submitted. We would then go through a formal approval review, where we would do assessments and provide either a decision whether the project proceeds or not. And then for the projects that are then successful, we would move ahead with signing a contract to work with that partner. And from there, it's kicking off the project. That's when the project really starts and gets going. And this, of course, includes engagement with our local office in Dakar.
Yeah.
Lastly, I'd like to talk through the timeline so people are aware of, things are moving quickly. And I think it's a great time for the audience to get involved. We launched the challenge in mid-January. Today, we have the live online session. We're hoping for July to have the full evaluation of all applicants. So this timeline would move very quickly. By September, we will have the selection of proposals. And by October, preparation for the COP26, which is the leading climate change event to be held in Europe. And in November, we would like to invite the winning participant to attend the COP with us. And I think that gives a good outline on some initial things.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Alan Dans. And we saw some questions coming in through the chat, but they might actually also be answered through the panel that we're going to go for. So first, let's move on to our panel. Thank you for all of the 5 speakers. They are still with us. We will have a Q&A with them as well. But moving on to our panel, with 5 panelists. I'll be introducing them to you. I have some questions for them. Again, if you would like to ask some questions yourself, please feel free to chat with us as well. We have Professor Sheikh Morshed Jahan, IBA, DU, and co-founder of CDCS and Sustainable Market Foundation. We have Dr. F.H. Ansare, MD and CEO at ACA Agribusiness, and Andrew Jenkins, the Technical Assistance Team Leader of the Char Settlement Project, and also the 2030 Water Resource Group World Bank. Anwar Farouk, former Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Advisor for Harvest Plus. Then we also have Syeda Sitwat Shahed, Agricultural Water Team Lead, 2030 Water Resource Group of the World Bank as well. Welcome to all of our 5 panelists. I wanted to start with you, Professor Sheikh Morshed Jahan. Welcome everyone, but first of all, a question to you. How do you think that modern technology could actually help ensure climate resilience, as this is the main part we're talking about today?
Thank you so very much for having me. First of all, given my background, particularly my work in the agricultural sector with research, action research and interventions, so I can see many different areas where private sector can come and participate. One of the areas in general, if we talk about agriculture, we have to invest in precision agriculture a lot and vertical agriculture. As Professor Salimul Haq was mentioning, that we are facing all these problems. So we have this drought problem and salinity problem, all these things. And unless and until we, and also our member of the parliament, Ms. Selma, was mentioning about the point of groundwater harvesting. So these are very crucial issues. We should be very responsible in using our resources. We have only very limited resources. And unless and until we promote precision agriculture, we cannot ensure proper utilization, responsible utilization of resources like groundwater. And also, if we think about, if we move beyond, if we look at the whole value chain, we must ensure that we have a very green value chain. Safe food is a big concern. Bangladesh has achieved a lot over the past 50 years in terms of production. Just imagine in 1970s, we failed to feed some 70 million people, but now we are feeding 170 million people, and that with less land, arable land. So therefore, we have done remarkably well in increasing the output. And also we have all these saline tolerant and drought tolerant options there as well. So, but the point here is that whether the food that we are making, is that safe? We cannot ensure that. We cannot trace the value chain. And unless and until we bring in technological solution is there, we cannot trace those value chain and we cannot ensure the safety as well. So for that, even if we think about global food security and inclusive development, we need to bring in technology to help us in that. Number two is another way for the private sector to consider that is very important is that we need to green the value chain. Regardless of the sector, regardless of the industry, we need to have a green value chain. And how we can green that value chain, there also we can bring in technology. For example, we have apparel industry here, and effluent treatment plant is a mandatory stuff that they need to do. And many of them have implemented that. They have these facilities, but we're not so sure whether they are in use or whether they are performing well or not. But if we bring in fourth industrial revolution technologies, for example, IoT devices or all these RFID chips and sensors and all these things, if we bring that one, we can immediately monitor whether they are performing what they are needed to perform. So in green value chain, there also we can think about technology. And also we need to work on beyond this technology. For example, there's a big floating economy. We have floating agriculture. So are we really helping our base of the pyramid farmers in further developing this floating agriculture? We have floating markets. where they do not have this physical facility. All these are climate challenge communities. So are we doing anything to help these communities who are involved in floating economy? I think this is one area where we need to really think very strongly. Another one is we have these floating hospitals and schools. So what we are doing is a social investment as well there. Okay, coming back to the earlier point that we have done a good job in production, but not in marketing. So in marketing, we need to do a lot. So with this, I'd like to stop right here. I'm extremely sorry. I have another program just running now. So absolutely, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for giving a bit more insight into the private actors as well, but also the role of technology in it. Thanks a lot, Professor Sheikh Morshad Jahan. Then I actually wanted to move to our next panelist. We have Dr. F.H. Ansari with us, MD and CEO at ACI Agribusinesses. Welcome. Welcome. We can see you very well. I'm curious to hear from you what the interventions are that we need to make Bangladesh actually agricultural climate resilient. Let's give a second because we can't hear you well. Could you?
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
From the previous presentation, we have seen that there are huge vulnerability in Bangladesh and also very serious frequency of vulnerability. In that case, when there is a frequency is very high and unusual, then it is very difficult to adjust or to adopt any kind of technology here. So though there will be repetition, still I would like to mention one thing is that basically when there are vulnerability in climate, then the adaptation of crop agriculture and for the animal agriculture, especially poultry, cattle, and aqua, everywhere there are serious challenge. And to mitigate this challenge, these are all life. It requires huge technological innovation and research. If I mention one thing very simple, in Bangladesh, the technology cycle is about 10 years, laboratory to the field. So we have to reduce the cycle to 3 to 5 years. That is very, very important. And nowadays it is possible because of molecular intervention and also imported technology. It requires only local adaptation. And this is very, very important. We have to find out. In that case, I can say private sector intervention will be very, very important, and private sector need to be engaged. There are huge proof in this country that private sector has done wonderful job in vegetables, wonderful jobs in maize, wonderful job in poultry, cattle, and across everywhere. The private sector has brought a lot of new technology in the country, or they have innovated and adopted in this country. And then important area of this is new practices, development, capacity building, and also adaptation. Why I say the capacity building? Again, it requires also capacity to introduce the new technology. Why capacity? When there are problems of the farmer, for the solution, they rush to the nearest dealer. And the nearest dealers are basically mostly the trader or the retailer. They are operated from and guided by the private sector. So basically, private sector has to have a capacity to support this kind of dealer. Private sector have a capacity to transmit all kind of information through this dealer so that farmers get appropriate information. In that case, training of the dealers are very, very important. Training of the farmers are very, very important. And the areas, especially I say that agriculture in the environmental house will need to be developed in this country or adopt. Why I'm saying, when there is a huge temperature, rising temperature than poultry, cattle, aqua, they cannot survive with in certain area of the country and certain time of the country. Day and night temperature variances can make rice, empty grain. So that require also a lot of technological adaptation and practices implementation in this country. And then communication. I think digital communication is very important nowadays because of it has a speed and it can connect dealer, extension worker from the government or the public sector, and also private extension worker and also the farmers. So digital communication will be very important and the prime to adopt the climate resilient agriculture in this country. So these are the area I see. These are very, very important, and there are huge scope to improve or adapt and also mitigate the climate situation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ansare. Actually, it also, again, builds a good bridge to also talk about. So we know that there's a lot of interventions needed. We know that there's a lot of challenges. We also talked about a lot of acute issues and requirements. That's why I also wanted to move to Andrew Jenkins, Technical Assistance Team Leader of the Charge Settlement Project, but also part of the Water Resource Group for the World Bank. So we talked about these different challenges that we see in Bangladesh, the over extraction of groundwater, but also the pressure on the environment in the Howrah region. We know that private sector involvement is very important. We know that we really need appropriate supply and market change solutions. What do you suggest are suitable solutions or opportunities that we see in relation to these?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to take part. I think it's very important that we focus on the some specific areas which have already been mentioned, particularly by Salim Al-Haq, who mentioned the Howrah, the coastal zone, particularly the southwest. We've also heard about the situation of shrimp cultivation around the Sundarban and the impact on the Sundarban. One very important area which Salima Ahmed referred to is the Barind, which has considerably lower rainfall than the rest of Bangladesh and is suffering a real possibility of overexploitation of groundwater. I've seen this, and it's in its terminal stages, for example, in Gujarat, in the Rann of Kutch, where whole villages have had to move because water tables have dropped so much. So we need to be very concerned about this. So I'm a senior strategic advisor with the 2030 Water Resource Group, and we have been developing private-public partnership solutions to this, and I think there's a considerable scope for further private involvement. Basically, the success and the progress that we've made involves new techniques in rice cultivation, like alternate wetting and drying, and then shifting to high-value crops, which are much more water efficient, for example, to permanent tree crops like mango. And these have a very considerable potential for producing more crop per drop and reducing water extraction, improving water use efficiency. But we discovered that the linkages, both in terms of the specific technical inputs, like, for example, the technology, the devices for drip irrigation with mangoes, but also the onward linkages in terms of marketing, because we end up with much more perishable crops. These are very important, and these are effectively private sector areas and also private sector opportunities. So Salima Ahmed emphasized the importance of involving local stakeholders. So the approach that we've taken has been through a multi-stakeholder platform, which involves the institutions she mentioned, people like Union Parishad, leaders, local business, larger business, and so on, so that through this platform, together with government and civil society organizations like some of the large Bangladeshi NGOs like BRAC, can participate and work together to make these solutions work, because that's when they do work, when people come together to do that. So that's an area, I think, where there are very considerable private sector opportunities. And then also in the Howrah, as Salim mentioned in relation to the Sundarban, in the Howrah, there are considerable opportunities for green and eco-friendly innovations and developments. Particularly, we have areas like Tangua Howrah, which are very important in terms of large amounts of birds. There are also big fisheries resources, and an environmentally friendly approach needs very carefully targeted environmental investment, green investment from the private sector in the context of a multi-stakeholder partnership, which we're also developing. And this is all done very much in collaboration with the government, which plays an important role in the 2030 Water Resource Group partnership. So I think that I hope that answers your question, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you, Andrew Jen. Kingston, actually, you're also pointing that the private sector involvement is very important, but also engaging other stakeholders, and specifically also the government. Salima Ahmed talked about it, but also Professor Salimul Haq. But we also have our next panelist, Anwar Farouk. She's the former secretary of the Ministry. He's the former secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture and the advisor of the Harvest Plus. And we already heard some of our speakers talk about the role of the government and the actions that you also need to take, or the national ownership. How do you see the role of government authorities to deal with all these climate challenges that we are discussing?
Thank you very much. So we have to understand the very basic issues like Bangladesh. We are predominantly an agriculture-based country. Our agriculture contribution to GDP is around 14%. Around 50% of our population directly or indirectly depends on agriculture. And agriculture is still the main livelihood of our rural people. So typically, we are a food deficit country. Now we are very recently, we are self-sufficient in our food. And in 73, we are a bottomless basket. Now we are a country of a basket full of many crops. Bangladesh has been shown a tremendous success in our agriculture in some time. Rice production has gone from 10 million to 36 million. It's the fourth largest rice producer in the world. And most of our crops like potato, vegetables, fruits like mango, jackfruit, pineapple, banana, we are one of the 10 largest producers in the world. And we only having 8 million hectares of land. Can you imagine? So this is a success in our agriculture. There is some time. And our agriculture at this moment is we are shifting from the traditional to the modern agriculture and sustainable agriculture to commercial agriculture. For that commercial agriculture, we need huge investment for the private sector. That's very important. Our major challenges for agriculture is the climate change impacts, and also our land is decreasing and our population is increasing. So we need to produce more food for our coming population with less land. That's very challenging for the present situation. And at the same time, our South Bengal is having 30% of our total population is very vulnerable for climate change impacts like salinity, flood, drought, excessive and less rainfall, cyclone tidals, as Professor Salimul Haq was mentioning. The government is very much keen to develop agriculture facing all these challenges. Most of our development projects at this moment take into consideration about the climate change impact. As Salimul Haq was mentioning that the present government at the present time, 8% of our budget is earmarked for the climate change impacts. That's very important. So our government investment is mainly towards for the research and development mainly. What we have done in the recent times, Bangladesh so far developed over 30 stress tolerance varieties, of which 27 rice varieties for the different climatic situations, which is highest in the region. We are now in the stage of developing multiple stress tolerance varieties. This is very important. In 27-28, government constituted Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, as Salimul was mentioning, with 7 billion Bangladeshi taka by the government. Now the fund has rises to 37.5 billion taka. So far, the BCCT has taken 787 projects, of which 423 projects have been completed. And also in 2018, government approved the mega project we call the Bangladesh Delta project, which is with the help of World Bank and Netherlands government. It's one of the largest projects in our country, with $37 billion, which has 80 projects, composed of 80 projects, 65 projects for the infrastructure development and 15 for the skill development. So from the government side, we can very easily say that government is very keen to develop our agriculture, to sustain our agriculture and facing all these climate change impacts, because food security is the prime concern for our government. So what government is trying to have and climate smart agriculture to ensure food security for our nation. That's from the government side. I think the government part is very keen in for the adaptation and also the mitigation part of the climate change impacts.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Anwar Farouk. Then I wanted to actually move to our last panelist, and you were also touching a little bit on it.
Regarding the private sector.
Sorry? Sorry, you missed the last.
Regarding the private sector, so as we are discussing about what is the scope of the private sector investment in Bangladesh, that's very important because we at this moment we have a very vibrant private sector. Our agriculture sector is dominated by the private sector, especially the input distribution, for example, seed, fertilizer, pesticides, all are done by the private sector. And our agriculture marketing is dominated by the private sector. Value addition is by the private sector. Agro processing is the private sector. Storage, transportation, and even the mechanization in the recent time is dominated by the private sector. So private sector role in our agriculture is very prominent. There's a huge scope for the private sector to invest in more in our climate smart agri business, especially in the research and development, because I think at this moment the private sector has their capacity for research and development, for the varietal development of stress tolerance varieties, especially stress tolerance varieties, and also water efficient varieties, short duration varieties for the adaptation of the climate change impact. That's very important.
Yeah, so I can hear that we can talk a lot longer about the private sector involvement, but also that is actually something that I would also like to ask our final panelists. So if you hold that thought for a bit and see if we have a bit more time to dive a bit deeper into it. But thank you for giving a bit more on the private sector engagement next to the government actions that need to also be taken up to. But I also wanted to move to our final panelist that we have, Syeda Sidwat Shahed. Thanks for joining us, Agricultural Water Team Lead 2030 of the Water Resource Group of World Bank. And for you, I actually had the question that we were also kind of diving into now. When you talk about the more geographical remote areas or the coastal regions of Bangladesh, and the importance of it was mentioned by our former speakers. But how do you think that the private sector engagement can contribute for the economic development of these specific remote regions?
Thank you so much. And first of all, I would like to thank and express my gratitude for giving me this platform to speak and contribute. So basically, as my former colleague, Mr. Andrew Jenkins, has already pointed out, that we in 2030 Water Resources, we are basically promoting a private, public, and civil society-based platform to include the inclusion of participation from, of course, the public agencies, which is very much vital for formulation of policies, implementation of policies. But then again, the contribution of the private sectors is also quite important. So that is why we are basically providing a one-stop platform for everyone to come together and contribute in an integrated manner. And that particular focus is basically even more prominent for the coastal region, as well as How regions, and also the Chittagong hill tracts. As I have mentioned, as it has been mentioned repetitively, that in these geographically remote regions, the challenges is just not only the lack of development. It is also the infrastructure. It is also the inclusiveness, which needs to be taken into consideration. And given the extent of success that the private sector has already been able to achieve in making that connection between the high quality seeds, discoveries, innovations, from the lab to market connectivity, fast tracking, as well as in the post-production mechanization, as well as the value chain linkage. I think it is very much important for the private sector to also come in to address the development of sustainable business models in the specific areas of the coastal spot, as well as the hill tracts. For example, in the coastal area, we can understand the challenges which are related to salinity intrusion. There is also the problem of soil erosion, and the problem that the extent of water logging. So we definitely need to find out a business model which can help the locality to adapt a win-win situation, where we can have an integrated production system for aquaculture, crop culture, and in cases where it's not possible to do both, maybe we can optimize one. But the thing is that whatever that has to be done, if it is done through the private sector participation, it's very much possible that we can bring in the community stakeholders' voice, their engagement, and we can develop a rural entrepreneur system. I think my former panelists, and as well as the speakers who are joining from ACI, they're doing a wonderful job, but we need more like ACI in Bangladesh to promote this, to bring in more technological innovations. And the same also goes for the Chittagong hill tracts. We basically need to move from the geographical comfort zones and focus more on the hotspots where the problems are more complex. Therefore, specific situation and need-based business model development is now a matter of urgent need. Thank you. I would like to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Syeda Sidwat Shahed. That sheds a bit of more light on how we can also reach the more remote areas and the coastal region in Bangladesh. Well, we've heard a lot, and I think we could also continue for a lot longer. We do still have some time for Q&A. But now that you've heard a lot about what the DFCD is, what the challenge is, and whether you're eligible or not, what the challenges are, how you can best go and meet those challenges to come to possible solutions, we want to show a little video that shows you what the challenge is about, and we'll be back with you in a second.
Are you dedicated to improving the quality and management of water, the resilience of agriculture, or the health and diversity of ecosystems within Bangladesh? Then apply and participate in the Scalable Climate Solutions Challenge. Go to www.thedfcd.com and find out more.
Yes, so I think this calls urgently that everyone can actually apply now for the challenge. If you still have questions about how to apply the application or more thematic questions, then keep dropping them also in our Q&A box. We actually have one question coming up. It's a question to Albert. I don't know we had an Albert, but let me first read out the question and then we'll see who wants to take on. So we are back with our 5 speakers. We have the 4 of them remotely with us, and Aart Mulder is still with me at the desk. The BRAC Bangladesh, from BRAC Bangladesh, do you encourage co-financing in the concept note stage? Can you please clarify the expectations from DFCD? Will I be giving this to you, Aart, or to one of our speakers? Aart?
Yes, fine. Yes.
Can you take on this question?
Yeah, so the BRAC NGO question, yeah?
Yeah.
And about how we're going to...
Whether you encourage co-financing in a concept note stage.
For sure, for sure. I think it's an excellent question. And that's something that maybe not prominently highlighted yet. We work together, Alex explained it clearly, in an early stage already with grant funding, 350,000 euros as a maximum, but we try to work already directly in this initial stage towards a financing solution, and the financing solution can be up to 10 million euros equivalent. So in that perspective, in this early stage, in the assessment stage, we already prick through the whole proposal to look actually if it's going to work, if it's really going to be scalable. And if it's scalable, we are there to find a solution on the financing side, including a long-term finance solution up to 10 million euros from the DFCD fund.
Yeah, thank you. And I actually also had a question to Alex. We heard different speakers, but also some of our panelists talk about that there's really an urge for education awareness, and that's a very big part, an essential part of creating a movement or behavior change. We also talked about the role of vulnerable groups. You touched upon a little bit of that's a big essential part also of the challenge. But could you elaborate a little bit more on, do education or awareness, does that also play a role or a part when people apply for funding? Or is that happening more aside? Because I'm wondering whether that can be bankable or profitable, or how do you see that?
I think, this is a great question. And I think for the projects, education does play an important role. Some of the things that can be done is having example like a model farm that people can see, because seeing is believing. So letting people see what is the best practice and then spending the time to show people how it works. And of course, the people in Bangladesh, once they see the best practice and they know how to apply it, they will. So I think there's a huge role we mentioned BRAC earlier, as an NGO, but, S&V is on the ground. There's other NGOs who are there. So I think the part of the solution is to bring together many partners, but education is foundational to transformational change. And it's something that in some sense may seem simple, but it's fundamental. A building is only as tall as its foundation. And I think education is that instrumental first piece. And it's integrated into the deals that we put together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another question coming in actually from the audience to Professor Salimun Haq. Can you talk a bit more about whether there's any measures taken to improve the ocean ecosystems of Bangladesh?
Thank you very much. That's a very important question. It is something that is recently becoming more important and recognized. The Bangladesh government is thinking about a blue economy program. At my university, the Independent University of Bangladesh, we have recently set up a Bay of Bengal center to work on this. It's headed by a very senior ambassador of Bangladesh, Mr. Tariq Karim, who has been doing a lot of diplomatic work around the Bay of Bengal with the other countries around the region. And so, yes, it is an increasingly important area of interest. As far as things having been done, I would say not a lot. But we certainly need to look a lot more at the opportunities that exist, not just on the coastal low-lying area, but offshore as well. A very important area for us to look at.
Yeah, so possible for people to apply for that. Can I ask you, Alex, can you mention any examples of ocean projects maybe from other countries that are funded by DFCD?
Sure. So we had done a project. One of the sectors we really like is seaweed. And one of the challenges with seaweed is it's generally expensive to grow and cultivate. So we're looking at ways that we can turn to the blue ocean economy. So we invested in one last year in Indonesia, which is a pod system which reduces the cost to grow seaweed. And this then can unlock the potential of future food, because many seaweeds can be very high in sugar. Other seaweeds can be high in protein. And instead of trying to fight for limited resources on the land, we just need to think forward. We need to think into the future. And I think partnering with universities in Bangladesh, also building on the, algae and aquaculture space has tremendous potential.
Thank you. Very at the beginning, we had Mohammed Saifullah talk a bit more about your company and your project, and Art Mulder here at the desk wanted to raise a question actually for you, so I wanted to give you the floor to ask your question.
Giving the opportunity again. Mr. Saifullah, and it's really a pleasure that we work together with DFCD on your project and that you show it as an example. What I liked about your story is the phase about introduction, about intervention, about innovation, and also the whole model towards the farmers themselves. The farmers get better. Also, they have a direct market linkage towards you, and you have a very good export product also for Bangladesh, and you drive a very sustainable business. So that's fantastic. What I was wondering, and I haven't asked that question before to you, so maybe I put you a little bit on the spot, but do you think this kind of model might also work in other countries, even from your own company or from any other company, to copy actually your model?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. For example, this is very common.
You have a very good export product.
Yeah, because the supply chain is very common for this kind of shrimp, particularly for the smallholder farmers. The countries which is supplying, or the supply chain is more dependent on smallholder farmers, there this model can be utilized. This can work for shrimp. Also, this can also work for fisheries and other product which is exportable. In Bangladesh, the black tiger shrimp is grown by the smallholder farmers, and these smallholder farmers can be chained together to supply this in the factory. But if the similar model maybe in Africa and other regions, if the model persists, it can be replicated. It's absolutely.
Thanks. Great.
Yeah, that answers your question. I'm also wondering, going back to some examples that were given, I think by Professor Salimun Haq, if I mentioned correctly, that we also see the issues of the water, that if you have pregnant women or with childbirth, that you see the issues and the consequences that it has. So there you can also see more of the gender link that it has. And I know that you're focusing, as I said, on the vulnerable groups. But what other role or what other links do you see in the gender aspect within this fund? I can ask it to Alex or Art, or maybe Professor Salimun, you want to see what kind of link you would like to see in the fund with the gender?
So let me take an attempt at this for while our colleagues from the fund think about it. In my view, in Bangladesh, there is a huge potential of opportunities to think out of the box. There's so much happening in this country that we can identify all kinds of potential benefits, linkages to explore in terms of dealing with the impacts of climate change. I'm speaking specifically on adaptation in particular. And as we heard from all of our speakers, it's a very, very rich array of actors and knowledge. Now, what I see the particular advantage of this fund is to help us bring on board private sector potential entrepreneurs. to get involved in this. And I can speak from a long history of experience of trying to engage with the private sector. It's not easy. If there's no money to be made, they don't come to workshops and seminars and webinars like this. You are very lucky to get our two colleagues from ACI, but they are busy making money. You know, they are here as a courtesy to you, but they don't want to come and listen to me giving talks and lectures. What they're interested in is seeing an opportunity and then getting some grant funding or at least subsidized interest funding to explore it with their own money, with their own investment. And if we can find those and encourage them and support them, then I think we are on to a very good opportunity. But the incentives have to be there for them. They are not going to come out there with their own volition. And that's something we would be very happy to work with the fund to see if we can drum up more interest in this fund. Simply doing a call for proposals, I'm afraid, will not get you very much. People have to know what to give you as proposals. If they don't know, then you won't get anything. Let me give you an example. You know, the Bangladesh Bank, the central bank, under our previous governor, Mr. Atiur Rahman, he allocated $200 million equivalent for innovative finance in the environment sector through the commercial banks. Nobody took those loans. They were soft loans. Nobody took them because nobody knew what this meant. You know, nobody knew how to deal with them. The commercial banks didn't know how to handle the money, and the entrepreneurs didn't know it was available. And if they knew it was available, they didn't know how to access it. Most of that money has not been spent. And so, you know, you have to build the capacity to understand, to make the investments in the first place.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I'm actually also going to refer back to Art. So how do you also see the link with gender? How should it be embedded in, so more than reaching out to vulnerable groups, but if you look at it embedded in the funding?
If you look at it embedded in the funding, I think the professor made a really clear case of the entrepreneurship. That's extremely important. But at the same time, if we look at vulnerable groups, but we also look at vulnerable groups and women specifically for the DFCD fund. And the reason being, if you look, there's been so much research in the world that the victims of climate change disproportionately are women. So women have actually the most vulnerable part in the population worldwide. That's proven in many researches. At the same time, if you want to cope with climate change adaptation, you need to work together with stakeholders. And also many research that show also in cooperative structures that actually the women are more successful to battle climate change, to provide resilience against climate change than the male part of the population. So only for these two reasons only, we specifically distinguish the beneficiaries not only being vulnerable groups, but also particularly we are going to monitor the female population that benefits from adaptation projects.
Yeah. So if you say that they're actually being more successful, and we also talked a lot about it being more participatory. Salima Ahmad, you also talked about we need to really focus on grassroots, but it has to be participatory. You have to not talk about them, but make sure that the ones that are involved. And as we know that are more successful, so are we also looking for more female entrepreneurs that apply for this fund, more female-led organizations, or is that not?
Yeah, for sure. It's part of our due diligence to look also at the so-called corporate governance structure, including the female component in it. So we look at every project. We also ask the questions about the participation of women in the organization. That's purely part. And of course, if we have exactly equal projects, then there will be bonus points provided for more female-led organizations.
Yeah, to make sure that it's also participatory. Actually, we have to round up, but I wanted to ask you, Salima Ahmad, to give you the final word with the only actually female speaker at this point left with us in this call. What can we expect from Bangladesh government actually if we're going forward and tackling the climate challenges?
At the moment, Bangladesh government should go to the grassroots, use the local leaders, local political leaders and the people. And also the education ministry has a big role, because I think the curriculum need to be included in the syllabus, because you are learning so many things, but you are not learning about your land, water and air, which is ultimately your lifeline. So that is, I think, very important. And finally, as we were talking about the women entrepreneurs, we did a project in Hatia with the improved cook stoves, and you have seen that how it was very successful, but now it is not successful. People are not using it. So that actually gives a step forward, one step forward, but 10 step back forward. Because then people say, okay, let's use the traditional way, the firewood and all these things. In my area also, there is no gas line. People are using all the firewoods, which is, as I said, this really kills me in my thoughts. So how actually we can involve our women entrepreneur to have innovative ideas and go to the household ideas, because from the home, if you can find a solution, then ultimately the whole country, the mitigation and adaptation is possible. So how women entrepreneurs can design and develop each product, a service product, or a final product, which can help to mitigate and adapt. And for that, funding is very important. And I'll be very happy on behalf of Women's Chamber to sit and talk to you guys, if we can make an appointment and come back to you. But
thank you. A great invitation also.
Finally, just I would like to say that let not it be only the brain, let it be distributed to all. We need brain, this idea to each individual of Bangladesh citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of great things that we can take forward, and I want to thank all of you, all of our speakers and panelists. We are coming to an end, or we are actually to the end. So that's why I wanted to take the moment to thank everyone that was viewing us, that was with us, that joined us, sent questions. Good to know that you can keep joining us. There will be made recordings of all of these sessions that you can find online. A lot of the questions that we couldn't answer will be answered later on and will be posted as frequently asked questions online as well. I think you heard a lot about Bangladesh, why it's one of the most vulnerable countries, why the challenges set out specifically in Bangladesh as well. So please, feel free to apply. You've heard what the conditions are, but also why you really should apply, and specifically that we are in need for more female entrepreneurs as well. You can go to the dfcd.com/challenge to apply. And the next event is May 6th. That is specifically going to be focused on Kenya. But as of today, everyone can join as well and learn from the specific regions that we are encountering with the DFCD. Final remarks I want to give to you, Art, with just a few seconds on the clock. But is there something you would like to tell our viewers?
The whole world talks about climate. It's now time to do things. So just apply and propose your business model. And we will do our best to cooperate together with all of you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.